Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Cash. I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Specialist with NCAL. We are here today to talk about new scams through an EMDT lens. So you all are in the right place. We have a really great presentation for you all. Lots of really good, relevant information, especially surrounding our vulnerable populations and elders specifically. You could just head to the next slide.
Oh, it didn't want to go.
No worries. Take your time.
Let's see. Oh, there we go.
Perfect. So welcome all. If you want to spend a couple seconds changing your name to display what you would like, that would be great. And we'll just go over some housekeeping items. If you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Before we do that, of course, we have our disclaimer about our funding and the opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this presentation and in the materials are that of our contributors and do not necessarily represent the position or policies of the United States DOJ. You've seen this before. Next slide, please. And here we are at some housekeeping items. You all know this. We've been on Zoom for many months now, so this is nothing new. Please mute if you're not speaking. We do have a smaller group today, so there will be time to engage with the content. Feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions or to engage with the material. Again, if you want to rename your Zoom square with your first and last name, or maybe where you're joining us from, that would be great. And of course, if you do have a comment or question during the time that you would rather speak aloud, feel free to raise your hand using that function. We won't be having any breakout rooms today, so no worries about that. And of course, if you have any tech issues or if anything comes up during the presentation, feel free to chat me privately in the chat function, or you can email me. My email is right on the screen. Some of you might have my phone number. You can text me anything you need today during this time. All right, next slide, please. So we have a wonderful presentation today. Jim Foley is joining us to talk about scams and financial pitfalls that some of our elder folks in our community might be dealing with. Just a little background. James has been with the National White Collar Crime Center since 2002 and is currently the vice president and is involved primarily with financial crimes, intelligence analysis training, and technical assistance. He has been involved with early planning and development with the Financial Crimes Against Seniors course and participates in regular curriculum updates on exploitation, as well as instructing for conferences and classes, including being a keynote speaker for the 4th Annual Attorney General Rosenblum's Elder Abuse Conference in Oregon in 2019. James is currently working with the development team to create a new office for victims of crime funded course for law enforcement, which is related to responding to transnational elder fraud. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. He's also assisted with the development of the user guide for the Senior Abuse Financial Tracking and Accounting tool. Again, we will reference that later as well, and also provides technical assistance to those using the tool when needed. He's also a current member of the advisory board for the National Elder Abuse MDT Training and Technical Assistance Center. So his name and face might be familiar to some of you all. And I will turn it over to him to start our presentation. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Mm-hmm. And are you seeing the slides like the way you should? Oh, mm-hmm. Very good. Okay. Obviously, I don't really need to read all these to you. You can probably read them if you're looking at your screen. But basically, we're going to look at some of the key concepts around some of the financial scams that are going on, as well as look at some of the emerging trends in scams and some of the sort of the techniques that people are using to actually to pull off these scams, as well as identifying some of the strategies to respond to them, both for law enforcement and for victim services folks and anyone who is has a tendency to respond to a person, an older adult that's being scammed. And pardon the cat noise that you probably might have heard in the background. I thought she was outside, but apparently not. So that hopefully you won't get a lot of cat and dog noise during the course of this, but just if you do, I'm sorry. I probably should have locked myself up somewhere a little more securely. Anyway, maybe while you're looking at this poll, I'm going to quickly throw the cat outside again.
All right. While we are dealing with some cat wrangling, take some time to answer this poll question. This will just give us a little bit of background on who is here. Denise, I love your comment that the cat should be properly introduced. Love that. We all have our furry friends who love to join us on Zoom.
Actually, you want us to go ahead and submit these?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry about that.
No problem. We are just filling out our poll question about who we have in the room today.
Very good.
Time to answer that, and I will share the results in a second. Okay, does everyone see the results? We've got a good mix of folks here with us today. A little background, and I will turn it back over to James.
These are the 6 scams we're going to talk mostly about today. Romance scams, lottery scams, family emergency scams, government imposter scams, tech support scams, and phishing scams. As you probably understand, these I might have to move that. There we go. It's not so much that these scams are really new, but the way the methods that are being used is kind of what's new. And kind of in the world of emerging scams, a lot of those 6 especially have been around for quite a while, but the way that they're being accomplished and the way they're stealing the money from folks has taken on some new methods. And I thought it was interesting that most of these scams work on 1 or 2 or 3 of these elements that are at the bottom of the slide: the isolation, emotion, and urgency. Some of the scams have all 3 of those elements built into them to get the person to give up their money, and some just have 1 or 2 of those things. But I think it's important to really think about how the people, when they're being scammed, aren't using the most logical part of their brain. They're usually working from an emotional point of view, and many of the scams have an urgency aspect where they have to do something. They feel like they really have to do something fairly quick in order to make something either not happen that's going to be bad, or to make something happen that they think is going to be good. Anyway, moving along here. Let's see. And I did want to kind of introduce the idea of transnational elder fraud, because that seems to be one of the types or a category, or whatever you want to call it, of some of these elder exploitation scams, that they're being perpetrated from someone in a completely another country, somewhere else in the world. The perpetrator is basically scamming probably lots of people all at the same time, and the actual definition is when the perpetrator is outside the U.S. There are some very similar types of scams going on where the perpetrator is actually just in another jurisdiction. That technically doesn't qualify as a transnational elder fraud crime, but they're very similar when the perpetrator is completely somewhere distant, which it seems to me scams even 10 years ago were often committed by people in person. They would be, and elder fraud and abuse was, the victim was seeing that perpetrator. And what seems to be happening a lot more now is that the older adult is victimized over the phone or online, but it's from a person that they'll never actually see, at least not see in person. And oftentimes they don't really see them at all in reality. And these types of crimes also end up needing more additional investigative resources for the folks that end up responding to them. The victim support is very similar in a situation where the perpetrator is actually nearby the victim, but in some of these cases, as we'll talk about a little bit later, with the victim and the perpetrator being in two totally different places in the world, the victim is not always, in my opinion, the victim's not always as easily convinced that they're actually being scammed. So moving along again. So starting with romance scams, older adults are vulnerable to these because they're looking for companionship. It's that isolation element that falls into place here, and the scammers are very good at pretending, to be the ideal match for that person. Anybody who's isolated wants companionship of some kind, and if it's online, that's something. It is at least companionship. And these guys, the folks that perpetrate these crimes are actually quite skilled, and they manage to steal lots of money. So here's some of the aspects of romance scams, basically in the transnational style of scam, and it's kind of similar to any kind of an online romance scam. The victim is probably going to meet the person originally on a dating website or through social media or some type of online media. The one thing about romance scams, it does usually, the perpetrator takes quite a long time to really convince the victim that they are legit and that they are in love with them, or whatever they're trying to convince them. They're before they really start trying to get money from them and that sort of thing. And they also often claim to be working outside the country, which in a sense they probably are. They're probably running this scam on a number of folks from some other country. And so that they have some an excuse why they can't meet with the person because they're working outside the country, and they often suggest that they switch their communications to more of an obscure communications type app, which they have an excuse for it, but usually the real reason is that it makes it a little more difficult to trace. So if they do end up getting sort of caught up in the fact that it's a scam, there's going to be less of a trail in their communications. And often the perpetrator has a story where they need some money, and oftentimes it's money so they can come home to the US to be with this person that they have talked into being convinced that this person really cares about them. And so they'll they end up sending them some money because they can't get at their own money. There's always some kind of an excuse. The other thing about transnational romance scams, the money that they have the victims send to them, they don't want it to be sent directly to them because that's going to give away their location or some information that they probably don't want anyone to really have. So they have a what they call a money mule, which is a person in the United States where that person can receive the money that the victim is sending to the perpetrator, and with causing a little bit more of a difficulty in tracing it. It's going to, it's going to be a little bit more trouble. And quite honestly, the Department of Justice and the FBI have done a lot of work in the past few years going after these money mules in the United States, because they actually are able to figure out who they are, more so than figuring out who the actual perpetrator is. And they what they generally do, this particular, a money mule could possibly be a person who's totally complicit with the crime, as knows that they're a part of this this criminal operation, and they're doing it just because they're making some money out of it. There's another whole group of money mules who are also being scammed by the perpetrator, and the perpetrator has them convinced that that maybe they're another romance person in the in this perpetrator's life, and they're scamming them in the same way they're scamming the people who are sending this person the money. And they have a lot of different excuses. I heard of one romance scam where the victims were supposedly sending money that was an investment that that the perpetrator was going to use to make more money. So when he came back home to the United States, they were going to be much more wealthy than otherwise. And so that particular money mule really thought she was just doing some business with this person who wasn't in the country, but was convinced that this was legitimate. Some of the money mules that get found out, the law enforcement folks will basically give them what's called a money mule letter, which basically says, you are probably facilitating a crime, money laundering or some sort of a crime at least, and you kind of have a choice. If they think that the person really was kind of inadvertently drawn into this scam, they will pretty much give them that letter and let it go for the time being, with the warning that if you continue to do this, you're going to be arrested. And so sometimes that's what happens, and sometimes they just they have a money mule letter, and the officer who encounters that money mule often will put that information that they have been given a money mule letter and a warning. They'll put that into databases such as the FBI's index database, which reports the basic information about that particular incident. And then other folks, if they encounter a money mule, they can actually look into that database and see if that person's already been warned at an earlier date. But that is kind of the U.S. connection, and they've been doing a lot of work actually tracking those folks down. It's a whole lot easier, of course, than trying to get to the perpetrator himself or herself in another country. These are some of the aspects of how you know that it's a scam. When the communication clues, such as this person that we can't meet in person, from some excuse or another, they're stuck working outside of the U.S. and they often can't send a picture. They tell the victim, well, I can't really send a picture right now. And the truth is, I think the smarter perpetrators know that if they do send a picture, first off, it's probably not going to be them. And then if someone has the wherewithal to do like a Google image search, they could find out that picture is actually, in all kinds of different places with different names and different sort of identifying characteristics. So they don't really want to often send a picture. And if they do, it is usually it's certainly not them. It's a picture that they've got offline or from some website or someplace. And usually part of the communication is explaining why they can't return to the U.S. Without getting some money from the victim. The other clues are going to be in how the money is requested. The idea of sending it to a money mule, that's a clue right off the bat that there's probably maybe something a little fishy. If they ask for gift cards or cryptocurrency or they want it sent through a instant transfer kind of a situation where like Vimeo or Zelle or some of the Cash App type things, that's kind of a clue that there's something a little bit fishy. If it was a legitimate person, they would probably be happy to have the money sent directly to them in some way, a bank transfer or some sort of a way to actually send it to them. But by going through these methods, it makes it much more difficult to track. So if you encounter a romance scam and you're wanting to kind of help this victim recover from it, the first thing you're probably going to have to do really is convince the victim that they're actually being victimized. I think romance scams are one of the ones that are probably the hardest to convince a victim that they're really being victimized. And once they have maybe decided that that is the case, the victim's going to probably need help doing a number of different things. And some of these immediate steps will probably fit in a number of different scams, but some of them have some specifics that go on with the specific scam that they're dealing with. And first of all, you got to help the victim stop all contact with the perpetrator. It's got to end. That's if the contact continues, there's still more chances for being scammed. And a very important thing is to help the victim contact any affected financial institutions. If they've given out a bank account information or they've had transactions going between them and the perpetrator or the money mule, they need to talk to those financial institutions and change those accounts, or change the situation so that no more money can be drained out of them. Also, the victim could probably use some help blocking the perpetrator from their phone, their email, those kinds of things, just to so that the recurring scam information doesn't keep bombarding them. And another important thing is to collect any saved messages or pictures or anything that the perpetrator did send that could be helpful for a law enforcement investigation that may take place. So collecting those things could be helpful. Moving on to imposter scams, I think it's really quite interesting that imposter scams have caused the second highest losses to older adults, and that information came from you'll see the little citation at the bottom. The part that I didn't put in, is second only to romance scams. Romance scam is actually the number one money drainer in terms of the most money lost by older adults to scams. But the imposter scam appears to be very workable by these perpetrators, and has actually had the second highest amount of loss for older Americans. And part of the reason that these scams work is because they seem so legit. The victims really tend to believe that the message that they're getting is coming from usually some type of a government situation. For instance, they're almost always contacted on the phone, and the caller claims to be some sort of a government person, either from a court, from the IRS, from the police. Social Security is another one that there's a lot of imposter scams where the perpetrator is claiming to be from Social Security. The caller generally gives the victim some sort of a reason that says basically you're going to have to pay this money that I want. You're going to have to pay, or you're going to be arrested, or you're going to be charged, or some kind of terrible thing is going to happen. And that goes back to that of the three elements: the urgency and the pretty much the fact that they're believing it. They got to do it, and they got to do it quick. And if they don't, they're going to be in bigger trouble. And I don't think it's not just older Americans or older folks in general that these type of scams are working on, but they're serious. And in some cases, I think a more older person tends to believe that the government is legit. If this person says they're from the court or from the IRS or whatever, a lot, folks are going to believe it, especially if if the perpetrator knows what he's doing, which they all, these folks are skilled. They practice. They know exactly what they're doing and what's going to work. One of the things, in terms of noticing that this is not legit, is that the government usually doesn't call about things like this. That's not the way they're going to get to you. If they need to talk with you, they're probably going to send a letter, or they're going to do something other than just call you out of the blue and say that you're in trouble and you owe this money. And the payment methods don't make sense. The IRS and the courts and the police, they don't want gift cards. They're not, if it's legit, they don't want gift cards. They probably don't want a cash delivery unless you're bringing it down to their office or something. But they don't really want Western Union or some kind of a instant bank transfer kind of a thing. That's probably not what a legitimate government situation would have you do. And so once again, for the immediate steps for this type of a scam, once again, contact the affected financial institutions. If they've given out bank information or have been dealing with with some sort of a financial institution, you need to help the victim, contact them and get that squared away so they're not going to be continuing to drain money from that account. And once again, you need to block the perpetrator from the victim's phone, help them do that. And then, I guess, a lot of these kind of steps, an older person may not really know how to do these things because they've never had to do them. That's so if someone, an APS person or a law enforcement person or someone responding to this situation, if they can't help them themselves, they probably could find somebody that could help them do these things. And once again, also collect any saved messages or voicemails if they're, that would possibly help a law enforcement investigation later on down the line. Okay. Lottery scams have been around for quite a while. I think that's one of the oldest scams that I recall hearing about, and they still work because people want to believe that they've won a lottery. And quite honestly, usually it's like a foreign lottery or something along those lines, some sort of a sweepstakes. And if I think for the longest time back years ago, the scam of the Canadian lottery was the one that people were using because it seemed almost logical. It's a country that's close by. You might have got a ticket. The way this really basically works is they're told that they've won a large lottery jackpot or sweepstakes of some sort, but in order to receive the winnings, they have to pay some taxes or some sort of an expense in order to get the money to make it to them. And I think the scammers, it all might seem illogical, but if the victim says, well, I don't remember playing the Canadian lottery, the scammer will just say, well, it was a friend of yours must have bought that for you, or one of your relatives bought that ticket, and how nice that is that they bought a ticket for you. And the idea that a few $1,000s could be worth risking if you think you're going to get $1 million or $2 million or $3 million or however many. And these particular phone calls that the scammers are using, they're going out to hundreds, if not thousands, of potential victims. It's just and the odds are that some of the folks are going to believe it, and they're going to send them a couple $1,000s or something. And so if you've got even 100 victims that you're trying to scam, and even if only 10 or 12 of them actually fall for it, you've really had a pretty good day as a scammer. And I think it's kind of there's a sort of a spin-off version of the lottery scams that I think is kind of related, that I've heard of, that's not quite as popular, but it is used to steal money. And that's where the perpetrator will kind of troll through Facebook groups and different social media things and find a person that has kind of a good heart, has a reputation maybe of, that's become obvious through their social media stuff, the helping veterans, or doing work for a hospital or something, some kind of volunteer, good-hearted person. And what the scammer does is contacts that person, claiming to be someone from Microsoft, for instance, saying that, we know that you've been doing all this good work, and we were looking for a way to reward, people who are volunteering in a big way, and your name came to the top, and we know you want to do this good work, and so we're going to give you a big chunk of money, a few $100,000 or $1 million or whatever, to promote whatever cause you've been working so hard to help over these years. And then the person, the victim has a tendency, maybe, oh, I have been doing that, and they, why would they not want to spend some money, to help me help others? And so then it's kind of the same as the lottery. There's going to have to be some money sent to this perpetrator in order to get that money to the person. In one circumstance that I heard of, basically they needed a couple $1,000s to pay a courier to actually bring the check to the person's town, and they were going to fly in, make a big deal about it, and fly into the airport, meet him at the airport, and give him this big check. And then about the time that was supposed to happen, then of course something fell through, and they needed another $1,000 in order for this person to get this special award. And that that's just about as unscrupulous as I can imagine. All of these things are terrible, but that trying to convince somebody who's been helping people that they're going to get money to help more people, and then to rip them off, that's just wrong. So in terms of lottery scams and sweepstakes stuff, the idea, if you didn't play, you probably didn't win. That's a pretty good way to look at it. Although they will convince you that someone else bought the ticket for you, or you just don't remember. You've been around a while, and this took place a while back. So and if you did win, you would have to pay some taxes, but you wouldn't be paying them this way. This is not the way you would end up having to pay your taxes on your winnings. Once again, a lot of the same things you need to do right away for this victim, and that contacting the affected financial institutions. They might need help in doing that, to make the right steps in order to keep the more money from being drained, because possibly in a lot of these situations, the perpetrator will say, well, just give me your bank account information, and we will deposit the money into your bank. And instead of depositing money into their bank, they steal money out of their bank. Once again, also blocking the perpetrator from the victim's phone and email, that sort of thing, and saving any voicemails or emails. And one slightly different thing, collecting any addresses where the money might have been instructed for the victim to send. And one thing, it seems kind of odd that they would actually have somebody send money to an actual address, if that was if it was a scam like that. But I did talk to a couple of years ago, I talked to the wife of a lottery victim, and one of the stranger things, it was a Canadian lottery, and it was American who had, but he had actually been playing the Canadian lottery for a number of years. So I don't know if the scammer actually figured that out and thought it would help, to actually try to scam somebody who actually had played the Canadian lottery. But what they told him, of course, was the same thing that they tell all the victims, is you're going to have to send some money in order to pay some taxes and to do some things. The kind of strange thing about that, they told him basically to send it to a home address in a town in California, which he was, I believe, in another state, but and so he did. He sent, I think it was probably $5,000 or so to this address, and some, a name and an address in a little town outside of Los Angeles, and then nothing happened, of course. And I guess he got another call and said, "Oh, sorry to bug you like this, but we actually need another 2,000 in order to make this money available for you." And this time they had a slightly different address. It was in the same town, but it was a slightly different address. And so he sent some more money. And then they went radio silent. They had pretty much got all the scam money they were going to get, I guess, from him. And I think by that time his wife had convinced him that it really was a scam. And for quite a few months, he wasn't convinced. He really thought, I played the lottery and I won the lottery. That's, there's nothing wrong with that. The addresses that he had sent it to, the local law enforcement checked into those, and they basically were uninhabited houses where theoretically no one lived. They were like for rent, but no one was living there during the time that he was sending the money. So either someone was stopping by to check the mail, or there was some folks just sort of squatting, you might say, in those houses during that time. But that would make it sort of a good idea to maybe to check if there was any addresses, because these days it would be more likely to be a money mule type situation where the person was getting this money but might not actually know that it was a scam. So might be worth checking that out. Tech support scams. These are very popular. Usually, especially folks who aren't really terribly computer literate will tend to believe things that they hear about their computer that they might need to address. And usually they get a message of some sort saying that there's a virus on their computer or malware or something, some kind of terrible stuff that's going to wreck their computing situation. And it usually comes as a phone call from what I've been told, but an email or a text will also be a possibility. I knew one friend of mine, he got a phone call. He was actually beta testing a Windows version for Microsoft at the time. And some guy called, said, "Yes, your computer is infected and you need to let us into it." And he was like, "Are you kidding me? This is, anyway, sometimes they can get away with it. They tell the person that unless they get access into the computer, like so they can remote in to fix this problem, the victim's going to lose all of their files, or they're going to, a lot of folks store a lot of photos these days on their computers that mean a lot to them. And so they don't want to lose those pictures of their families and things that have taken place over the past few years. Or it might cause even more trouble. They might, if they don't let this tech support person in to fix whatever this problem is, they could lose a lot of stuff that means something to them. So if they give them access to remote into their computer, the perpetrator then can basically go into the computer and steal whatever they want. They can get any kind of whatever the person has in that computer that would be of value, either personally identifiable information, passwords, banking information, anything almost, is worth something, in the world of tech support scams. And they end up letting this person remote into their computer, and they steal a lot of stuff. and they always sound very legitimate. They're very clever at the way that they present the idea that this needs to be taken care of. But quite honestly, legitimate tech support is not going to just call you out of the blue and say that we need to get into your computer. Usually usually it takes a while to call tech support if you've got something going on with your computer, and you have to actually jump through some hoops and stay on hold for a while and that kind of stuff until you can actually actually talk to someone, and then you can you can give them access and they can go in and try to fix whatever it is that they're trying to figure out. I had to call tech support one time when my internet just wasn't working quite right. My modem just didn't seem like it was working quite right, and so the tech support person, when they started talking to me, they asked for a number on the bottom of my modem, and they were legit. I was convinced that they were very legit. I gave them the number on the bottom of the modem, and they said, well, that modem is like 14 years old. And I think I know what your problem is. You need a new modem. And sure enough, that was the case. And I was telling Anna earlier, I had a very interesting tech support scam perpetrated or attempted to be perpetrated upon me just last week. And it was one of the more interesting ones I've seen. I was actually looking at a government document of some sort. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but it was a pretty large document. It was a PDF, and it had a table of contents where you could click on the line in the table of contents. It would take you to the right page for what you wanted to see. So I clicked on this table of contents line, and before the program even went to that page, a window popped up on my computer, and a voice, a very authority sounding kind of a voice, in very stern tone, tells me, this is Windows Defender, and we have discovered some malware on your computer, and you need to not close this window. You need to not shut off your computer. You just need to call the number at the bottom of this window, and we will get into your computer and fix it. And then it said, if you do close the window or shut off your computer without actually calling that number, it's not only going to destroy all of your files, whatever this problem you've got is, but it's also going to harm our national network. And it's gonna, and I was like, that's a scam. And so I closed the window and I shut off my computer. And I was just a tiny bit leery, so I ran a couple of virus scans and malware scans, and there was absolutely nothing wrong on my computer, but it was just really well done. I mean, it looked and sounded very, very official, except that that's not what they would do. That you might get a window that pops up, tries to get you to buy better malware detection or something like that, but it's not going to be your Windows Defender program popping up a window like that and telling you in very stern language that do not close this window. But I just thought that was very quite unique and kind of a modern new way to mess with people, try to get in and steal stuff out of their computers. I think one of the main things about tech support scams, if you talk to folks, older folks, or even not older folks, the most important thing to keep from getting scammed in one of these type of things is prevention, and regular backups to an external drive. That can save so much stuff. I know you've all probably heard of ransomware and all of that, and ransomware can't do much of anything if you have good backups. These types of scams thrive on the fact that people tend to forget that, or they don't do them to an external drive that they can store somewhere off the computer. And the other thing is to use some quality virus and malware scanning software and do those scans on a fairly regular basis. And even some of the cheap and free ones actually do quite a good job at finding the things that could be causing trouble. And and kind of last but not least in prevention is don't click on attachments in emails from strangers or things that look suspicious. I think it's very interesting these days. I've been getting almost more of these types of weird links to click on in my texts, on my phone that are certainly some sort of a scam. It'll say, we need to upgrade your operating system or something, some sort of a tech support kind of thing. And it'll want me to click on some really bogus looking link, which is something you definitely don't want to do. Anyway, once again, in order to help the victim recover from tech support scam, need to definitely contact any affected financial institutions, because oftentimes the scammer will say you're going to have to pay a little bit to fix this. It's not going to cost you all that much, but it's going to be worth it because it's going to save you from losing all of your data and your files and photos and all of that stuff. And once again, collect any saved messages from the perpetrator. That I would have liked to recorded that the voice in that window, but I was a little too shocked. I would have liked to have recorded that to play for people just because it was so interesting. Also, especially I think with some of the older folks, they might need help dealing with backups and restores and things like that. I've known some of the folks that I've talked to who maybe really didn't get into dealing with computers because it wasn't something they had any interest in, because they were 60 or 70 years old, and it wasn't until their kids and grandkids started using Facebook that they even wanted to ever have a computer. So they might not really be too adept at things like backup and restore and scanning and stuff like that. So they may need help from a person who is responding to kind of the problem that they're having, and maybe collect any types of addresses or any accounts where the money was being instructed to be sent. Even if it didn't get sent, it would be good to have those for a potential law enforcement investigation. How am I doing for time, Anna? Am I doing okay? Yeah, okay, good. Just only really a few more slides. The family emergency scams is one of the other ones that irks me the most. I have to admit, it's the idea where, and it's usually aimed at a grandparent, where the perpetrator is either impersonating their grandson or daughter, or they're impersonating some kind of a person in a position of authority who explains that some kind of emergency has arisen and they're going to have to provide some money in order to get their grandkid or whoever it is out of this trouble. And they use that urgency aspect of the scammers, and it has to be done quick. Otherwise something terrible is going to happen. The person is going to end up rotting in jail, or they're going to they're not going to be able to get out of the country that they supposedly are in. I think it's interesting too. A lot of times the perpetrators of these tend to actually do some pretty major research to find out where, they'll kind of check out the social media stuff on a particular person and see if they're on vacation, or is the grandson actually out of the country, on a Peace Corps trip or something. If they can find something that makes this grandparent or whoever they contact believe that, oh yeah, that is where my grandson was, he is out of the country, that's going to make the scam work a little bit more easily, probably. And I've heard of, prosecutors have told me that they have actually prosecuted some folks doing these types of scams that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just one thing after another. It's always something more. They need more, or the person or their grandkid or whoever it is going to be in bigger trouble. And they often, grandchildren, I think, is probably the most used. And I think the reason, of course, is because chances are they may be separated from their grandparent by location, or they may be living in some other town or somewhere. There's more likely that, the grandparent is going to be an older person that might be more easily fooled by this scam than if they just called their mother or father or something. Although mothers and fathers have been used in these family emergency scams. There was one a while back where the mother was called, and her son, she knew he was in Mexico on a vacation. It's kind of a young adult type son. And she hadn't heard from him for a couple of days. And apparently the perpetrator knew that doing some research had found that he was going to be in Mexico. So the perpetrator called claiming to be a Mexican official, and her son had been in an accident and needed to be life flighted back to the US because the hospital in the town where he was at was not going to be sufficient. And she was going to need to send, I think $6,000 or something like that to pay a private sort of a life flight helicopter to get him back to the US where he could be treated for this terrible injury. And and I believe she actually sent the money before she realized that he wasn't even in that same town. But oftentimes they'll claim to be law enforcement, an attorney that's dealing with the grandchild or the family member who supposedly has gotten in trouble. A lot of times, from what I've heard, they're supposedly the grandchild is in another country, has possibly been drinking a little bit or doing some drugs or something, and has gotten into an accident. And it's not that they're hurt, but they're in jail. And so either an attorney or some law enforcement type person supposedly calls or contacts, usually it's a call, calls the parent or the grandparent and says, we're going to need to send me some money in order to get this problem taken care of. And it's going to have to be sent quick. The urgency thing comes into effect, of course, once again. And it's really scary for a parent or a grandparent to think that their son or grandson or granddaughter is in some kind of trouble in a country, other than the US. It's bad enough if they were in trouble in the US. And this type of a scam is very close to my heart because a couple of years ago, my stepson's 90-year-old grandmother got a call from supposedly an attorney in the Philippines saying that her grandson had gone to a wedding for some college friend and was involved in an auto accident. And there was, alcohol involved, and he was in big trouble. And she was going to need to send, I believe it was $3,500 to this lawyer through Western Union somehow. That was going to allow him to get him out of jail so he wasn't going to rot for the next month in this Philippine jail. And so his grandmother, 90 years old at the time, bless her heart, she called his dad and said, actually, I think his dad was visiting her at that time. So she sent him basically to Western Union with $3,500 to solve this problem. And as he was taking it to the Western Union, he called the boy's mother, who happens to be my wife, and mentioned how crazy this was that he was in the Philippines. And then she happened to call me at work to say, hey, wow, you're not going to believe this. Your stepson is in the Philippines in jail. And I said, you know what, I'll call you back because that's probably not the case. And I need to call his dad real quick and get him to stop, not give this money up. And so before I called his dad, I called my stepson. I called his cell phone, hoping he was between classes. And sure enough, asked him what he was up to. And he said, I'm just I'm on my way to class. And I said, okay, well, I just want to make sure you weren't in the Philippines. And he goes, yeah, I'm not. And so I said, okay, I'll call you back. And I called his dad real quick and said, this is a scam. You need to not give that money to Western Union to send to these people. And he said, well, I just turned it in. I just came back out of the Western Union and got the car right when you called. And I said, well, go back in and tell them it was a scam, and they will give you the money back most likely. And sure enough, they did. And I just, it made me really realize that one of the things that I hadn't done over the past couple of years was talk to my own family and extended family about how some of these scams work. And it dawned on me that if I would have, talked to his dad, or to even to my wife more about things like that, or to and told them, talk to your grandparents, talk to these folks, so they know that this is a very good possibility that they might be trying to, be scammed, rather than that you're really in trouble. And it really kind of turned me around about awareness that I wasn't, helping my own extended family understand. And it kind of, got me talking and wanting to explain things a little bit better to folks, so they wouldn't necessarily fall for that kind of situation. Let's see. Once again, the immediate steps, they are starting to sound a little redundant, but need to help the victim contact any affected financial institutions, and if possible, collect the phone number of the perpetrator. So in case there can be a law enforcement investigation, they'll have something to go on. Along the same lines, shortly after the one that involved my stepson, one of my coworkers' husband's mother had been called with the same sort of a scam, saying that he was in Jamaica, I think it was, and he was in trouble, and she needed to send money to the embassy. She was given some kind of a bogus address that was supposed to be, and a phone number that was supposed to be the Jamaican or the U.S. embassy in Jamaica, and so luckily her son was actually home at that time, so she was able to know that he wasn't in trouble in Jamaica. And she mentioned it, or I guess he mentioned it, to his wife, who worked with me, and I said, well, that's really crazy. That it's lucky he was home, because that could have really, could have fooled her, and and cost her some money. And I said, well, did the phone number that she was supposed to call at the embassy, do you know what that was? And so she, I guess, called her mother-in-law and got the phone number and showed it to me. And it was it looked like a Florida area code. And as you probably all realize, area codes don't mean much of anything these days, because if you have a voice over IP type of phone, you can practically pick whatever area code you really want and make it look like anything else. I did a little research on that particular phone number, since I thought, well, that's kind of, that's, claiming to be the Jamaican embassy and all that is pretty interesting. But so I did a little checking on the phone number, and it was involved in some scams in Florida where they were selling cars that didn't exist. It was kind of an Auto Trader magazine scam. And I thought that was pretty interesting, that they, that they're branching out, using some, different types of scams to see what they can do. And so just out of curiosity, I couldn't resist. I had to call the number, and they said Jamaica, U.S. Embassy in Jamaica, and I said, oh darn, I wanted to buy one of those cars you have advertised in the Auto Trader, and they slammed the phone down about as quick as they could, and I think they changed their number after that. But it's just, I think, between romance scams and the family emergency scams, that is just as despicable, I think, as anything can be, because they're playing on someone's, good nature. I think, the love of their family, or or what they think is the love of their life. And that just irks me no end. I think last but not least, the phishing scams is another kind of an interesting one, where it's usually used to commit some sort of identity theft. And the idea is they'll get you to click on some kind of a link in an email or something that appears to come from somebody legit. I had one time that came from a person that I knew. He was actually an intelligence analyst in a agency in Texas, and all it had in it was a link. And it turned out it was a scam, and somebody had sort of commandeered his Outlook contacts and was sending this scam to everybody in his contacts. And since he was a pretty legit character, a lot of people could have easily fallen for it. And he sent a follow-up email quickly after that, saying this, my Outlook contacts was absconded by some scammer, and so don't believe any of the things you saw in the last day or so. But these things usually sound, once again, they look pretty legit. They are able to convince people that it's a legitimate situation, and they need to click on this link, or they need to do something that this perpetrator wants them to do. And I think probably the number one way of doing this these days is a really legitimate looking email with an attachment, and it appears to come from someone legit, someone maybe you even know, but which is not necessarily really someone you know. Or even these days, a text message with a link. As I mentioned earlier, that it's surprising how many scams are actually coming through text messages now. And then the third way is like a fake website. And these aren't used quite as much as they were, but I put it in there just because I thought it was so interesting. The term typo squatting, I always thought was a very interesting term, and it's almost can't happen these days. But in few years back, folks would they would buy a URL for something like the one that I was concerned with was actually Huntington Bank, and it had a typo in Huntington Bank. It was an easy typo to make if you were typing fast, and it took you to almost what looked like huntingtonbank.com, but it actually was a completely different website that was made to look like Huntington Bank's website. And then you would type your login information in, and they would steal it. And apparently at that time, I thought it was kind of interesting. At that time, there was a couple of criminals, mostly out of the US, who had purchased a whole bunch of URLs and website names that were just like one typo off from bank names and other companies that people would be likely to be logging into. And I just thought that was pretty tricky. And then they would just suck all your information out of that they could, while you thought you were on a legitimate site. What some of the banks started doing, I thought was very good. They started making their images in their website so that you couldn't copy them, because the scammers were just basically copying the website as much as they could and putting it in their own fake one. But some of the bank websites started fixing their images so that couldn't be done. And if they tried to copy them, it would, instead of a picture of a bank office or something that was on their website, it would have a little image that said, "This is a scam." So I thought that was pretty clever. But you won't see too much of that anymore. Once again, the main thing you need to do if you're going to help a victim who's been victim to a phishing scam, you want to help them change their email passwords and things that could have been compromised in the course of this scam. And also, once again, if they need help of scanning their computer for viruses and the malware, because that could be very likely what got added to their computer during this situation. And then also collect any saved messages, of course, from the perpetrator. With that, I'll turn it over to Anna again for a minute for our poll number 2.
All right, you should see that poll coming up. The question is, in your work with MDTs, what type of scams do you encounter most often? And feel free to click off multiple scams if you would like. All right, I'm going to end the poll now and you'll be able to see the results. We have very varied results as well. And I know that some folks need to hop off for other calls, so we will be done shortly. We just have a couple more slides for you all. If you do have to hop off, feel free, and I will send a follow-up email with some more information as well. All right, back to you.
Very good. Oops, I always have a problem after the polls. There we go. Some other things in terms of assisting the victims, I did want to share. It's really very important to help the victims report the scam to ic3.gov and to the FTC, and the folks in law enforcement usually will try to help them do that as well. And some folks feel like, well, that's just going into a database. It's not going to do any good. So why am I bothering? But what it does, and IC3 especially, it becomes sort of a brick in the wall. It's another piece of a puzzle that might. I looked into that database one time with a fresh scam and a phone number that the perpetrator had used, and ran a search in the IC3 database. This was been a number of years ago, and it. I think I had like 400 hits in the complaints. That where that same phone number had been used. Also, the elder justice coordinators in the U.S. attorney's offices. Each U.S. attorney's office now has a person designated as an elder justice coordinator. They can be very helpful if you need to talk to someone from on the legal side. The justice.gov/elder justice. Actually, there is no space between elder and justice to get to the Elder Justice Initiative's website. There's a lot of great information on there, both for helping victims, for following up with the things you should follow up with, and there's a network map of MDT type groups that are around the country that might be helpful. The fightcybercrime.org is part of the Cybercrime Support Network, which is one of my favorites these days in terms of resources, just especially for victims. There are so many resources on there based on what type of scam you've been scammed, and you may need a person, to help, someone who could help the victim kind of, go through that website and find some of the help that they might need. But there's some really good stuff. Eagle.usc.edu. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. There's a website called the Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement that has, it's incredibly valuable for law enforcement, and it actually has a lot of resources that would spin over to folks that aren't law enforcement as well. The IACP.org elder-abuse, that spot on their website has a number of, it's primarily aimed at law enforcement, but there's lots of good stuff. It also has the SAFTA tool, which is an Excel spreadsheet, macro-enabled spreadsheet that can be used in they're especially good for elder abuse and financial exploitation type cases because there's probably not 50 bank accounts. There might only be 1 or 2 bank accounts, and the only drawback to that particular spreadsheet is that you actually have to enter the information. It has very good drop-down menus where it's easy to follow, but you do have to input you can't scan things into it. You have to actually input the data. And the National Elder Fraud Hotline, you folks are probably familiar with that. It has lots of good stuff. It's run by the Office for Victims of Crime, and they will actually assign a case manager type person to a victim to help them through some of the things that they need to go through. And I think, bottom line for me is there are 3 really major steps in the right direction to help slow down this expanding problem. And one is outreach and awareness. Anytime you can talk to a group or even talk to your extended family, like I mentioned earlier, that is going to help this problem. Resources for victims is another thing, finding all the resources that you can, and then training and resources for law enforcement. This stuff is tricky, especially the transnational stuff. It's not it's not quite as basic as it might, some of the other types of financial exploitation might be when the perpetrator is actually in another country. But there are success stories coming out. I heard from a U.S. attorney the other day that the law enforcement in Ghana had actually extradited I think it was a romance scam perpetrator to the United States to stand trial. And a lot of times it's very important for the collaboration of state, federal, and private sector. All those entities have to combine and collaborate in order to really make a difference in this kind of a problem. Some training that our organization has right now, the Victim-Centered Solutions to Elder Exploitation is an online sort of self-paced, web-based training. It has 10 little modules where you actually sort of get to put yourself in the position of someone responding to a situation of elder exploitation. In some you're a law enforcement person, some you're a bank person, some you're an APS or a health worker. There's some different, and then you kind of decide what's the right choice. What's your next choice? What do you say? What do you do? It's kind of an interesting little program. Takes about 2.5, 3 hours maybe to go through it, but it's self-paced. You can start and stop and come back and finish it or whatever. The other, it says law enforcement only, and I put that on there because actually that's what it says on the website. But for the Financial Crimes Against Seniors class, we encourage APS folks to be in that class. And if they have trouble registering, if you talk to them and they have trouble registering, have them contact me, and I'll make sure that they are able to get in. So I think it's very important for law enforcement and APS folks to be trained in the same situation. Sometimes they don't really know what each other are doing or what their capabilities are. So if they sit through some training, it's a 2-day class, by the way. And then last but not least, coming soon, hopefully towards the end of March, this will be for law enforcement only, really. It's an OVC funded class. It's going to be 1 day, responding to transnational elder fraud, a victim-centered approach for law enforcement. That's going to, we've tested it out a couple times, and it's almost tweaked to the point where we're ready to actually put it out there. So we will be doing that one soon. And some other available training. The folks at NCEA, they have some very good stuff on their website. And then also the APS, I always get this wrong. It's their training. Oh, geez, help me out, Anna.
The TTAC people.
Yes, we'll call it that. They have some very good, they have a webinar that is archived, and probably some others as well. Last but not least, are there any questions? I felt like I rambled a little bit, so I'm sorry if that got a little rambly.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. I don't see any questions in the chat right now. So what we are going to do now, I know we went over a little bit, but I'm going to drop a link in the chat for an evaluation. This helps us a lot to make sure our content, our format is reaching you all. So just spend a couple minutes filling that out. I'll also send a follow-up with any resources that we covered today. And a huge, huge, huge thank you to James for this wonderful presentation. Super helpful, great anecdotes. And I feel like I at least learned a lot. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you at our next webinar.
I appreciate it. I just wanted you also to know my email address here on this last slide. If you have any other questions for me or things about anything that our organization might be able to do, please shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer it. This is kind of my main focus right now is elder fraud and exploitation and abuse. That's just that's kind of something that I just find extremely important and interesting at the same time, and I think there's a great need. So please. Looks like someone has raised their hand.
Yeah, I was just very curious because I saw on television an advertisement for this program where adults are adopting other adults. And it looked like a lot of it was the older people. And then one of the advertisements said that they thought that the young person was, just being nice to them so they could take advantage of them. And then I saw the movie, the Tinder Swindler. And isn't it a little bit dangerous for those types of shows? Because if someone's lonely, won't they think, well, maybe I can adopt somebody to love or to love me? And I was just a little thrown off by adults adopting adults.
I actually haven't seen that, but that does sound a little strange to me, because it is going to, as this might sound cynical, but I think folks who shouldn't be doing that are going to be doing it. And it's, I don't know.
That's exactly what I thought when I saw that advertisement. I just thought, oh no.
Was it like a nonprofit kind of a thing?
No, I think it's something reality TV or something where people adopt adults. I saw it as I was flipping channels, and I heard, someone saying, well, I think they're taking advantage of you. So I wanted to see what it was, because I had just watched the Tinder Swindler, and I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder now if they're going to do something like this, and older adults think that it would be good companionship.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to have to look out for that. See what.
I don't know what channel or anything. Did anyone else see it? Do you know where it's coming from? Anyone?
I think it was on A&E. I saw the same thing.
I saw it too. Yeah, that is pretty scary. I just have a question, Mr. Foley.
Well, sure.
I'm Bonita, and I was wondering if you have any stories on elders exploiting elders. Like, say, maybe an elder who is single, looking for like that romance type, and then seeking, in their mind, they already know who they're going to seek, right? They already know their target. And if their target is an elder at the same time, but is more medically fragile than them, that they look for that. Do you have any stories on that? Have you heard?
I don't really have anything specific in terms of the type of exploitation that is done more face to face. I have heard of that being the case, but I don't have any specifics. And in terms of the transnational stuff, there's no clue as to who this, the age, sex, or anything of the person who's actually being the perpetrator. That's just totally, unknown. But unless they actually get caught, which is good every once in a while.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
Kylie put how you can watch the show. Nancy, did you have a quick question?
Oh, looks like Nancy has a hand up.
I did. We had a case once where it started out as a scam, a lottery scam. It was Canada, as a matter of fact. And then once the person figured it out, he confronted the scammers. The scammers then got a Google shot of his house, started to talk to him about his car, how it would be a shame if his house burned down, and so on. And so then it became a real case of just threats and kind of, it was horrible. It sort of went away from the scam. And I didn't know how common that was if you knew of those things, because I think it impacts how we help people get out of the situation when they come to us when they're in it, because confronting them in that situation became disastrous.
Right, and I think the important part of that, I have heard of that sort of almost extortion type situation happening if someone actually confronts the perpetrator or the perpetrator's people. I have heard that those kind of warnings come to the victim, And I think that's one of the main reasons. If you're helping a victim, you need to help them cut off all communication with that perpetrator. It's not going to do any good. Let law enforcement be the next person that maybe talks to them, but don't don't try to get revenge on your own, because those folks, Google Earth is wonderful for finding pictures of people's houses, and it's not that hard to find out information. That's actually another whole type of scam, where folks just it's almost like just straight out extortion. They tell the person, well, I know where you live, I know who your kids are, I know what they do, I know what your schedule is, and if you don't send me some money, you're going to have some trouble with that. It's just, but in terms of that being the end of a lottery scam. So I've heard of that happening maybe once or twice over the past few years, but not in great quantities, and especially not if the people, usually they just disappear. If you cut off contact and don't send them any more money, they fade into the night, so to speak.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry, that's my dog. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. I'm going to drop the link to the evaluation again in the chat. Sorry. And please feel free to reach out to Jim if you have any more questions. But other than that, thank you all so much for attending, and we hope to see you in a couple of weeks for our next webinar. So thank you so much.
And don't, if you get an out of office reply to an email that I'm actually sort of out of commission until Tuesday. So, but I still do read the emails. So if you send one, soon, I will get it and I will respond.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one, everyone.